So this is gonna be a bit different from my usual topic talks because I actually wrote down a script for myself that I want to read out because there's just so many things and I don't really want to ramble. I recently finished watching MF Ghost in January of 2024. I have some strong feelings about the series. I'd like to point out some notes before heading into my critique of the series. I've watched most of Initial D. So I watched the original series, I watched the better stages, I've watched the extra stages, I've watched the live action movie, and I've watched the Legends movies. In some cases, both in Japanese with subtitles and with English dub as well. My expectations were not high for MF Ghost. I was hoping for some decent story and was expecting the driving to be the main point of the series, as it was similar with Initial D, especially in the later stages. At first, I watched the first 3 episodes of MF Ghost, wrote down my thoughts on my Discord server, and went back to watch the rest of the series later. So I will go on my initial thoughts first. Get it, initial. Which are based around the first 3 episodes of MF Ghost, and then I will mention when I got back to watch the rest of the series. The first 3 episodes. I found the premise of the first 3 episodes interesting, and I thought the setups were somewhat good. They waste no time letting you know that this is meant to be an Initial D sequel, set in the not so distant future, and there are plenty of callbacks and returning characters. Speaking of characters, I'm not really sure how I feel about the new cast. The main character, Kanata, feels extremely generic. The mechanic is okay, and there's the guy who drives the GTR. Is cringe. The main girl in the series is alright. Animation for the most part is decent, but nowhere near the levels of the Initial D Legends movies. I mentioned the Legend movies because they are set in the same universe, kind of, because they use the same license plates from the Legends movies for the few flashbacks. There are a lot of replays of scenes and certain parts feel padded out. Music is okay, I kind of like the ambient soundtrack and I'm glad they brought back the Eurobeat. The opening song is great and the ending song is nice. That said, I feel like the timing of the songs are off. They would make you believe that a cool moment is coming up, only to follow it up with a still shot of a building or the distant mountains, basically do nothing after it. If what I've read is true, this first season will have only 12 episodes. So either they are saving the better parts for the later stages, or the first 3 episodes are the example of what the formula will be for the rest of the series. Either way, MF Go's first 3 episodes are alright, but nothing special. So this was my first impression of the first 3 episodes. Here are my thoughts as I was watching the series from episode 8 onwards. And it's gonna be very clear why I mentioned that episode 8 is where I started to read down my notes as I was watching it along. So, this series is so drawn out, it's sad. I'm 8 episodes in, and the questionable pacing continues. The constant cycle of silence, exposition dump, sudden Eurobeat for a 10-second long action scene, followed up by a sudden cut to the angels talking about fan service, or the commentators describing that 10-second clip for 2 minutes long gets old really quick. They spend the first 7 episodes setting up the fact that Kanata's car, the Toyota GT86, is the worst car on the grid, and that Kanata is some kind of miracle child who was trained by Takumi Fujiwara. On its own, it's tolerable, but starting episode 8 is where everything crumbles down. In this episode alone, Kanata overtakes a Lotus Elise, overtakes a Lexus LFA, and outbreaks a Porsche. They even show that the Toyota 86 still has the factory stock brakes on it. In slow motion, mind you. The fact that a Toyota GT86 that tops out around like 200 km per hour manages to outbrake Porsche 911 on factory brakes is the biggest plot armor I've seen in a while. Sadly, this was just a sign of things to come. That sign being questionable or just simply terrible writing. In episode 11, there's a scene where Kanata mentions that he can't actually read Japanese. At first I thought it would be just a joke attempt, because for someone to travel to Japan, register to a racing series and get a part-time job without being able to read sounds hella absurd. But the episode went on, and sure enough, the guy was working in a cafeteria, taking people's orders and writing them down in perfect kanji. The show's answer to all of this? He has a really good memory and somehow remembers everything perfectly. Understand that my problem with Kanata is not that he has a good memory or that he is able to beat supercars in an anatomic car. My problem is that he is just a flat-out boring and uninteresting character who never makes mistakes. If it was shown that he got some of the orders wrong, then maybe it would feel less bullshit. But the show says, no, that would make too much sense. So instead, the owner of the cafeteria comes around and praises him for how perfect his kanji is. The only time they show him struggle with kanji is when the plot requires it. And mind you, this is in a scene where he needs to fill out a form for his part-time job after they already had him work there. How do you make it to Japan not being able to read kanji? Alright, I'm getting sidetracked. My thoughts did change about the series as it went on, especially about the characters. To put it simply, some of the characters in MF Ghost feel like a combination of characters from Initial D. We have a guy who drives a GTR who is very into a girl, won't stop talking about it. We have a mechanic who isn't sure about Kanata's skill level. He has an underpowered car that people look down on, and when Kanata takes him to a test drive, he's mad scared and yells along the way while Kanata is emotionlessly driving along. The other drivers are also either one-note or so absurd that they stand out. There's Koiki, the guy who drives the Alpine. He is set up as someone who knows Kanata, because they raced in the same Formula 3 series in the past. He doesn't stand out for that though. He stands out because he is hyper-focused on dating 17-year-old girls and dumping them when they turn 80. He literally skipped the first race of the series, half of season 1, to date a girl. They decide to set him up as the bad guy for season 2. What the fuck is this writing? Again, understand that I'm not against the bad guys of the story being bad for the sake of being bad. For example, Hajime no Ippo, an anime about boxing, straight up has season 3's main bad guy be just that, someone who enjoys to hurt people. The problem with Koiki is that on top of being a creepy scumbag who exploits women, he also gets plot armor. You thought it would be Kanata only, right? In an Alpine A110, season 1 ends with him setting the fastest lap record on the second circuit. Yes, the season 1 ends on a cliffhanger in the middle of a qualifying session. Not before the qualifying session, not after the qualifying session, in the middle of the qualifying session. The more that I think about MFG, the less and less it makes sense. You're seriously meaning to tell me that in the future where a racing series has 30 million worldwide viewers, they can't afford the minimum amount of safety requirements? There's no Hans device, there are no helmets, required bucket seats, there's no required harness, nothing. If someone is going to have a crash, they could very much die because there's no safety equipment around the circuit either. They are legit racing in the forest. They are racing in the streets. There are no barriers anywhere on the streets. At the start of the series, they mention how MFG has a problem with rich people showing up and winning the races. Yet everyone shows up with street cars. Racing cars don't just vanish because regulations change. Japan is known for some of the most iconic racetracks and for having some of the wildest racing series out there. You're seriously telling me that this is the best Japan would allow to happen? Where are the racetracks like Fuji, Suzuka, Okayama, hell even Twin Rig Motegi or Tsukuba? Why are we using street cars when we could use proper race cars? And what's crazy is that in the flashbacks where Koi is talking about how he knows of Kanata, they showcase Hockenheimring, one of Germany's racetracks. So you're really telling me that the most viewed racing series in Japan uses street circuits and mountain roads, but other parts of the world are completely fine with using purpose-built racetracks? And out of all of those countries, they showcase Germany. Yeah, how unlikely is that? But even if we are, just using street cars, highly tuned street cars maybe, why are we putting all of the cars in the same class? Why not say that this is multi-class? Why are the commentators mentioning the cars like they would all race each other? But they are clearly not. You may notice that I've kept the initial D and Euro B points to a minimum. And that's because I'm looking at MF Ghost as its own series. The topics of how characters like Takumi were butchered are things people already talked about. So I'll leave 2 of those videos on the end screen. There's not much else I feel like saying about MF Ghost. As a racing anime, I find it terrible. As an Initial D sequel, I also find it terrible. My expectations were not high, but it managed to underdeliver on them. The sad thing about MF Ghost is that we got an adaptation of an Initial D sequel, but we could have got an adaptation of other original stories. We could have had an adaptation of Overrev, Kanata, or even GT Girl. Sadly, MF Ghost is also proving a point that people are fine with garbage as long as it's polished enough. As many of the reviews for MF Ghost are praising it for being Initial D, but during daytime. In the same season of MF Ghost, there was also another anime called Overtake, a racing anime that wasn't based on a manga, made by the same people who were behind Recreators. And if I were to tell you which one I recommend you watching, it would be very easy to answer that. It's Overtake. If you want to watch an anime that has actually interesting characters and isn't riding on the nostalgia of a story that was made 2 decades ago, then go watch Overtake. If you are looking for a good racing manga that is similar to Initial D, then go read Overrev or Kanata. If you are looking for a racing manga that should have been MF Ghost, go read GT Girl.